The emergency lights flashed red across the massive council chamber. Representatives from dozens of alien species filled their seats, their voices creating a storm of different sounds. Some chirped, others growled, and a few made noises that humans could barely hear. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Thex, Zor of the Zathrian Empire, his scales gleaming under the bright lights. Thex Zor was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with dark green scales that looked like armor. His yellow eyes scanned the room, with barely hidden contempt. When he spoke, his voice boomed through the translation devices everyone wore. "The Outer Rim colonies have 3 more days," Thex Zor announced. "Submit to Zathrian rule, or we will take what we want by force. This is not negotiation. This is fact. Marka." In the back of the chamber, Commander Jake Morrison stood with his arms crossed. He was a human, which made him unusual in this gathering. Humans were relatively new to galactic politics, having only made contact with alien civilizations 40 years ago. Jake was in his mid-40s, with gray starting to show in his dark hair. His uniform was simple compared to the elaborate outfits worn by other species. Next to him, Captain Lisa Chen watched the proceedings with narrowed eyes. She was shorter than Jake, with sharp features and black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her hand rested on the communication device at her belt. 300 ships, Lisa whispered. "That's what our intelligence says they're bringing." Jake nodded slowly. The Zathrians were known for overwhelming force. They didn't just win battles, they crushed their enemies so completely that no one else would dare resist. It was effective, if brutal. A small hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a planet with blue oceans and green continents. New Haven Colony. Population: 40,000 humans and other peaceful species who had settled there 20 years ago. They grew food, raised families, and caused no trouble to anyone. These colonies are in Zathrian space. Thex Zor continued. They exist because we allowed it. Now we require their resources and their obedience. They're in neutral space, someone objected. It was a Delphini representative, their blue skin shimmering. The treaty clearly states. Census. The treaty means nothing, Thex Zor interrupted. We have 300 warships ready to enforce our claim. Do you have 300 ships to stop us? Silence fell across the chamber. The Delphini representative looked away. No one wanted to fight the Zathrians. The mathematics were simple. 300 ships was a fleet that could conquer entire sectors. Jake felt his communicator buzz. He pulled it out and saw a message from Beth Parker, the governor of New Haven. Her face appeared on the small screen, and Jake could see the fear in her eyes. Commander Morrison, Beth said quietly. I know you're at the council. Did they? Is there any help coming? Jake stepped out of the chamber into the hallway. Lisa followed him. Beth, I'm going to be straight with you. The council isn't going to act. Beth's face went pale. Then we're on our own? No, Jake said firmly. You're not alone. I'm bringing my fleet. There was a long pause. Jake, you have 12 ships. They have 300. I know the numbers, Beth. This is suicide. Probably, Jake agreed. But we're coming anyway. Hold tight for 3 days. He ended the call and looked at Lisa. She was already pulling up the fleet roster on her datapad. 12 ships. That's all they had in this sector. The carrier Liberty, 3 destroyers, 5 frigates, 2 support vessels, and 1 heavy cruiser. Against 300 Zathrian warships, it was laughable. You're serious about this? Lisa asked, though her tone said she already knew the answer. When did we start leaving people to die? Never, Lisa said. I just wanted to make sure you knew this was crazy. She smiled slightly. The Defiant is ready. When you are. They walked back into the council chamber just as Thex Zor was finishing his speech. The Zathrian ambassador noticed Jake approaching, and his eyes gleamed with amusement. Ah, the human commander, Thex Zor said loudly. Perhaps you wish to speak for the New Haven colonists? Will humanity pledge ships to their defense? Every eye in the chamber turned to Jake. He felt the weight of their stares but kept his expression neutral. The human fleet will respond to New Haven's distress call. Zor's mouth opened in what might have been a laugh. It sounded like rocks grinding together. Your fleet? How many ships will you send? Human? 12, Jake said simply. The chamber erupted. Some species made sounds of pity. Others seemed confused. The krill representative, a being that looked like a praying mantis made of crystal, clicked its mandibles in what their culture considered sympathy. Zor threw back his head and laughed. It was a terrible sound, full of genuine amusement and contempt. 12 ships. 12. We bring 300. And you send 12. He activated a holographic display that showed both fleets. The Zathrian armada appeared as a massive cluster of red dots. The human fleet was 12 tiny blue dots, looking impossibly small by comparison. This will not be a battle, Zor announced to everyone. This will be an execution. We will destroy these 12 human ships in minutes. And then, we will take New Haven. The humans will learn what happens when you challenge the Zathrian Empire. The other species said nothing. What could they say? The math was obvious. 12 ships against 300 wasn't a fight. It was a massacre, waiting to happen. Jake turned to leave. Lisa walked beside him, and he could feel her tension. As they reached the door, one of the Delphini representatives called out, "Commander Morrison, why do this? Why throw away your lives?" Jake stopped and looked back. Because those are our people down there. Because someone has to stand up. Because it's the right thing to do. He paused. And because we're human. This is what we do. As they left the chamber, they could hear Zor's laughter following them. The other species were already discussing the coming battle like it was a foregone conclusion. They were probably right. 300 against 12 was impossible odds. But Jake had learned something during his years in space. The galaxy had rules, mathematics, and logic that most species followed religiously. Humans had something different. They had stubbornness. They had creativity. They had a complete unwillingness to accept that impossible meant impossible. Back on the Liberty, Jake stood on the bridge and looked at his crew. They were young. Most of them. They had heard what happened at the council. They knew the odds. "Anyone want to transfer out?" Jake asked. "I wouldn't blame you. This is going to be rough." Not one person moved. His communications officer, Lieutenant Emma Walsh, spoke up. "Sir, we're all here. We're all staying." Jake nodded. He hadn't expected anything else, but he had to offer. "Then let's get moving. We have 3 days to reach New Haven, and a lot of work to do before the Zathrians arrive." As the Liberty's engines powered up and the small fleet prepared to depart, Jake allowed himself one small smile. Let them laugh. Let them mock. Let them calculate the odds and decide it was impossible. They were about to learn something important about humans. Impossible just meant it would take a little longer. The Liberty dropped out of hyperspace 3 days before the Zathrian deadline. The New Haven system spread before them, a small yellow star with 6 planets. New Haven itself was the 3rd planet, looking peaceful and green from space. It was hard to believe that in 72 hours, this quiet system would become a battlefield. Jake stood on the bridge, studying the tactical display. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations. Lieutenant Dan Cooper, his second in command, approached with a datapad full of reports. "All 12 ships accounted for," Dan said. "No damage from the jump. The colonists are hailing us. Put them through," Jake ordered. Beth Parker's face appeared on the main screen. Relief washed over her features when she saw Jake. "You actually came. I wasn't sure. I mean, I hoped. But the odds. We're here," Jake said simply. "Now, let's talk about how we're going to survive the next few days." "You have a plan?" Beth asked, hope creeping into her voice. I'm working on it, Jake admitted. First, I need complete maps of the system. Every planet. Every moon. Every asteroid. I need to know the gravity wells. The orbits. Everything. Beth nodded. I'll send everything we have. After she disconnected, Lisa's face appeared on a smaller screen. She was on the Defiant, positioned near the system's edge. Jake, I've been looking at your ship positions. We're spread out across millions of kilometers. If the Zathrians come in force, we won't be able to support each other. That's the idea, Jake said. Lisa frowned. You want to explain that? Not yet. Trust me for now. Keep your crew sharp and your engines ready. When this starts, it's going to get wild. Over the next 2 days, the human fleet engaged in what looked like chaos to any observer. Ships moved to strange positions throughout the system. The frigate Sparrow, commanded by Captain Chris Bennett, parked itself near a small moon with unusual gravity. The destroyer Ranger drifted toward the asteroid belt. The heavy cruiser Valiant positioned itself near the system's gas giant. On the Liberty, engineer Ryan Santos worked around the clock with his team. They converted one of the cargo bays into something that hadn't existed before on a human warship. Machines hummed and sparked as they assembled custom modifications. Captain's not going to tell us what this is for? One of the younger engineers asked. Ryan wiped sweat from his forehead. Captain says we need to be able to build ammunition on the fly. We're going to be out here alone for a while, and we can't waste a single shot. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Amy Price took a shuttle out into the dark. She carried hundreds of small devices, each no bigger than a basketball. They looked like ordinary communication relays, the kind used for civilian purposes. Amy spent hours placing them throughout the system, hidden among asteroids and debris. This seems like a waste of time, her co-pilot commented. Just following orders, Amy replied. Though she didn't understand the plan either. On the Valiant, Weapons Officer Kate Sullivan stared at the firing solutions her computer had calculated. Then she stared at the solutions Jake had sent her. The numbers didn't make sense. These trajectories are impossible, she muttered. You can't bounce a railgun round off a planet's ring system and expect it to hit anything. But Jake had insisted, so Kate programmed them anyway. If nothing else, it would be interesting to see what happened. As the deadline drew closer, Jake called a fleet-wide meeting. Every captain and senior officer connected via video link. Faces filled the Liberty's main screen, all looking tense and worried. I know you all think I've lost my mind, Jake began. Our ships are scattered. Our formations make no sense. We're doing things that no military academy would ever teach. There's a reason for that. He brought up a tactical display showing a traditional battle formation. This is how the Zathrians expect us to fight. They've run the simulations 1,000 times. They know every standard tactic, every conventional strategy. If we fight their way, we lose in 10 minutes. The display changed, showing the strange positions of the human fleet. So, we're not going to fight their way. We're going to fight like humans. Unpredictable. Adaptive. Stubborn beyond all reason. Captain Chris Bennett from the Sparrow spoke up. Sir, I'm parked next to a moon with weird gravity. What am I supposed to do with that? Use it, Jake said. When they come for you, let that gravity well throw you somewhere they don't expect. Weapons Officer Sullivan has firing solutions that use gravity assists and atmospheric skipping. Engineer Santos is building ammunition we can modify on the fly. Lieutenant Price has scattered sensors that will give us perfect targeting data. He paused, letting it sink in. Every piece of preparation we've done is part of one big trap. The Zathrians think they know how this battle will go. They're wrong. We're going to show them that humans don't play by the rules. Lisa leaned forward on her screen. What if they adapt? They're not stupid. They will adapt, Jake agreed. But adaptation takes time. Confusion takes time. Panic takes time. We're going to use every second of that time to hurt them badly enough that they'll think twice about continuing. Dan Cooper cleared his throat. Sir, Even if everything works perfectly, we're still outnumbered 25-1. Yes, Jake said quietly. Which is why we need to be perfect. No wasted shots, no hesitation. When the moment comes, everyone needs to trust the plan and execute without question. He looked at each face on the screen. I won't lie to you. Some of us probably won't make it through this. But 40,000 people on New Haven will live because we showed up. That matters. That's worth fighting for. The night before the Zathrian fleet arrived, Jake walked through the Liberty's corridors. Crew members worked at their stations, or grabbed what sleep they could. He stopped by engineering, where Ryan Santos was still making last-minute adjustments. You should rest, Jake said. Ryan looked up, grease staining his hands. So should you, sir. Jake smiled tiredly. Can't. My brain won't shut off. It keeps running through scenarios. Adolf, you really think we can do this? I think we can make them regret coming here, Jake said. Beyond that, we'll see. In the weapons bay, Kate Sullivan ran final checks on the railguns. Emma Walsh monitored long-range sensors from the communications station. Dan Cooper reviewed emergency procedures with the damage control teams. Throughout the small fleet, humans prepared for battle in their own ways. As Jake finally settled into his command chair for what little rest he could grab, he pulled up a picture on his personal display. His daughter, back on Earth, smiling at the camera. She was 12 years old and wanted to be a pilot like her dad. He'd promised to teach her when his tour ended. Jake saved the image and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring fire and death. Tomorrow would test every plan he'd made. Tomorrow, the galaxy would see what happened when you threatened human civilians. The Zathrians were coming with overwhelming force, expecting an easy victory. They were about to learn a hard lesson. Humans didn't know how to quit, and when you backed them into a corner, when you threatened people they'd sworn to protect, they became something the galaxy had never seen before. They became dangerous. The sensors screamed their warning at exactly the moment Jake had predicted. 300 ships ripped through hyperspace into the New Haven system, appearing like a swarm of angry insects. The Zathrian fleet emerged in perfect formation, a display of military precision meant to terrify anyone watching. At the center of the formation was the Dreadclaw, Thex Zor's flagship. It was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons. Around it, the other Zathrian ships formed ranks like soldiers on parade. They looked unstoppable. On the Liberty's bridge, Jake watched the tactical display with calm eyes. His crew tensed at their stations, but he remained still. Emma, open a channel to New Haven. Let Beth hear what's about to happen. Emma's fingers flew across her console. Channel open, sir. Thex Zor's voice boomed across all frequencies. His words were translated into dozens of languages, meant to be heard by everyone in the system. Governor Parker of New Haven Colony, this is your final warning. Surrender immediately, or we will destroy everything you have built. Beth's voice came through, shaky but determined. We will not surrender our freedom to tyrants. Then you are fools, Thex Zor replied, and you will watch the humans die first, so you understand the futility of resistance. Their tiny fleet cannot save you. The Zathrian ships began to move, scanning the system for the human vessels. When their sensors located the scattered human ships, confusion rippled through their formation. The humans weren't clustered around New Haven for a last stand. They were spread across the entire system in positions that made no tactical sense. Thex Zor's laugh echoed across the channels. Look at them. They're in complete disarray. They don't even know how to form a proper battle line. This will be easier than I thought. Jake allowed himself a small smile. Dan, give the signal. Begin Phase 1. Throughout the system, the scattered human ships suddenly came alive. But they didn't move toward each other for mutual support. Instead, they moved in completely different directions, as if fleeing in random panic. They're running, one of the Zathrian captains announced. The humans are scattering. Thex Zor saw an opportunity to end this quickly. Split the fleet. Attack groups Alpha through Epsilon, Pursue and destroy those fleeing ships. Show them there's no escape. The massive Zathrian fleet broke into 6 groups, each consisting of 50 ships. They rushed forward, eager to claim easy kills. The first attack group, designated Alpha, locked onto the frigate Sparrow. 50 ships against one tiny frigate seemed like overkill, but Thexzor wanted to send a message. Captain Chris Bennett watched from the Sparrow's bridge as 50 enemy ships bore down on him. His hands were steady on the controls, but his heart pounded. "Sir, they're launching missiles. 200 inbound. Wait for it," Chris said quietly, watching his display. The moon beside him loomed large, its unusual gravity field showing as distorted lines on his sensors. Wait. Now. The Sparrow's engines fired at maximum burn, but not away from the Zathrians. Chris drove his ship directly toward the moon, so close that his hull scraped the thin atmosphere. The gravity well grabbed his ship and slung it forward like a stone from a slingshot, at speeds no conventional maneuver could achieve. The Zathrian missiles, programmed for standard pursuit patterns, couldn't adjust fast enough. Half of them slammed into the moon. The other half chased the Sparrow's trajectory but couldn't match its impossible speed. In 3 seconds, the Sparrow had gone from being in front of the Zathrian attack group to being behind them. Chris didn't waste the opportunity. His weapons officer fired every torpedo the small frigate carried, point blank into the rear of the enemy formation. 6 Zathrian ships exploded before they knew what happened. Others scrambled to turn, their formation breaking apart in confusion. At that same moment, across the system, the traps sprung everywhere at once. The scattered human ships hadn't been scattered at all. They'd been positioned at exact points to create a 3-dimensional kill zone, and the hundreds of small sensors that Amy Price had planted throughout the system suddenly activated, linking together into a network that gave every human ship perfect information about every enemy vessel. Jake watched his tactical display light up with targeting data. All ships, weapons free, execute firing solutions. On the Valiant, Kate Sullivan took a deep breath and fired her railguns. The computer had told her this wouldn't work. Basic physics said it was impossible, but she'd programmed Jake's solutions anyway. The tungsten round screamed through space, not toward any enemy ship, but toward the system's gas giant. They skipped along the upper atmosphere, using friction and gravity to curve their paths in ways that no weapon should move. 30 seconds later, those rounds emerged from behind the planet and slammed into 3 Zathrian cruisers that had no idea they were being targeted. The Liberty launched a swarm of missiles, but not at the enemy. Jake's missiles screamed toward the asteroid belt. Their warheads buried themselves deep inside carefully selected rocks and detonated. Massive asteroids broke from their orbits, tumbling toward calculated intercept points that would take them right through enemy formations. The Zathrians, focused entirely on chasing the human ships, didn't notice the asteroids until too late. One destroyer simply ceased to exist when a rock the size of a building hit it at orbital velocity. Others tried to dodge but collided with their own ships in the confusion. Dan Cooper's voice cut through the chaos. Enemy attack group Beta is reforming. They're trying to concentrate fire on the Defiant. Lisa can handle it, Jake said calmly, and he was right. The Defiant faced 3 Zathrian cruisers that had cornered her against a debris field. Any sane captain would have tried to retreat. Lisa Chen was not interested in being sane today. She pointed her ship directly at the enemy formation and went to full burn. "Captain, we're going to ram them," her navigator shouted. "No, we're not," Lisa said with ice in her voice. "We're going through them." The Defiant accelerated to speeds that made her hull groan. At the last second, Lisa twisted her ship sideways and slipped between 2 of the enemy cruisers with barely meters to spare. As she passed, her weapons fired at point-blank range, torpedoes launching directly into the enemy hulls with no time for defensive measures. Both Zathrian cruisers shuddered and died. The 3rd cruiser tried to pursue, but the Defiant was already gone. disappearing into the debris field where the larger Zathrian ship couldn't follow. All across the system, the pattern repeated. Human ships appeared, struck hard, and vanished. They used terrain that the Zathrians ignored. They fired from angles that seemed impossible. They moved in ways that defied conventional tactics. On the Dreadclaw, Thexzor stared at his tactical display in growing disbelief. His fleet had lost 30 ships in the first 15 minutes. 30 ships, against an enemy that should have been crushed instantly. How are they doing this? He demanded. They're using the entire system as a weapon. His tactical officer brought up analysis data. Sir, their positioning isn't random. Every human ship is stationed at a point of strategic advantage. They're using gravity wells, asteroid fields, planetary rings as force multipliers. And their targeting data is perfect. As if they can see our entire fleet at once. That's impossible, Thexzor growled. Our intelligence said humans fight straightforward battles. They prefer direct confrontation. Perhaps our intelligence was wrong, sir. Thexzor watched as another of his attack groups fell into disarray, harried by a single human destroyer that seemed to be everywhere at once. The humans weren't fighting a battle. They were fighting a three-dimensional guerrilla war in space, using every advantage their smaller size and agility gave them. For the first time since entering the system, Thexzor felt a cold touch of uncertainty. He had 300 ships. The humans had 12. The mathematics said he should be winning, but the reality on his tactical display told a very different story. Jake Morrison stood on the Liberty's bridge, coordinating his fleet with quiet commands. Around him, his crew worked with focused intensity. The opening phase had worked better than he'd dared hope, but the real battle was just beginning. Sir, the Zathrians are adapting, Dan reported. They're starting to concentrate their forces. Good, Jake said. That means they're taking us seriously. Proceed to Phase 2. It's about to get rougher. The battle entered its second day, and the human fleet was bleeding. The frigate Sparrow drifted in space, its engines dark, and hull breached in 3 places. Chris Bennett and his surviving crew had evacuated to the destroyer Ranger. The frigate Hawk was simply gone, destroyed when it tried to make a run through concentrated Zathrian fire. On the Liberty, damage reports scrolled across Jake's screen faster than he could read them. The ship shuddered as another enemy missile struck their weakening shields. Smoke drifted through some corridors where fires had been extinguished. The medical bay was full. Forward shield at 20%, Dan reported, his voice hoarse from breathing recycled air. Port weapons array is offline. We've lost 2 of the main reactors. Jake gripped his command chair as another impact rocked the ship. Ryan, I need those reactors back online. In engineering, Ryan Santos was covered in burns and cuts. His team worked frantically around him, trying to hold the Liberty together with spare parts and determination. The main reactor had taken damage that should have shut down the entire ship, but Ryan refused to accept that reality. Captain, I'm routing power through systems that were never meant to handle this load, Ryan shouted over the sound of sparking cables. The ship is going to tear itself apart if we push much harder. Can you give me one more day? Jake asked. Ryan looked at the catastrophic damage surrounding him. By every engineering standard he'd learned, the answer should be no. The ship was held together by improvisation and hope, but he was human, and humans had a talent for making impossible things work just a little longer. Yeah, Ryan said, I can give you one more day, but after that, we're going to be a floating brick. The Zathrians had adapted to human tactics. They'd stopped splitting their forces, and instead, moved in massive, concentrated groups. Where the humans had used their agility and the system's terrain, the Zathrians now used overwhelming firepower. They saturated entire regions of space with missiles, making evasion impossible. The destroyer Falcon had lost main power when it tried to slip through a Zathrian formation. Dead in space, it had been pounded by enemy fire, until Captain Harris ordered the crew to abandon ship. The survivors were picked up by the Valiant, But watching the Falcon die had hurt morale across the fleet. Yet the humans kept fighting. They adapted to the Zathrians' adaptations, finding new ways to hurt the enemy. Lisa Chen, on the Defiant, had become something of a legend in just 2 days. Her ship had sustained so much damage that it should have been abandoned, but Lisa refused to stop. "Captain, we're down to 20% hull integrity," her executive officer warned. "One more good hit, and we're finished." Lisa studied her tactical display. A Zathrian battle group was pursuing them. 50 ships wanting revenge for the destruction Lisa had caused. "Then we'd better not get hit. Helm, take us into the ring system. Maximum speed." "Ma'am, at our current damage level, navigating the rings will tear us apart. So will those Zathrians," Lisa pointed out. "At least the rings won't shoot back." The Defiant plunged into the planet's dense ring system, weaving between chunks of ice and rock at speeds that left no margin for error. The Zathrian ships followed, but their larger size and damage sensors made the pursuit deadly for them. 2 enemy ships collided with ring debris and exploded. Others fell behind, unable to match the Defiant's desperate maneuvering. When Lisa finally emerged on the other side of the rings, she'd lost her pursuers. Her ship was barely functional, held together by emergency welds and Ryan Santos's improvised repairs transmitted across the fleet. But she was alive. More importantly, she'd destroyed or crippled 6 more enemy ships in the process. On the Valiant, Kate Sullivan continued to work miracles with her impossible firing solutions. She'd long since abandoned any pretense of following standard weapons doctrine. Instead, she fired rounds that took 10 minutes to reach their targets, using gravity assists from multiple planets to hit enemies from completely unexpected angles. "How do you even calculate these shots?" her weapons technician asked, watching another impossible hit register on the sensors. "I don't," Kate admitted. "I just trust the math Commander Morrison gave us, and hope it works." The trust was well placed. Kate's unconventional gunnery had accounted for 23 enemy kills, more than any other human ship. The Zathrians had started trying to predict where her shots would come from, but Kate constantly changed her methods, never firing the same way twice. Amy Price, no longer piloting but now serving as a tactical coordinator on the Liberty, watched the sensor network she'd deployed continue to function. Despite everything the Zathrians tried, they couldn't find and destroy all the hidden relays. The humans maintained perfect information about enemy positions, while the Zathrians operated partially blind. "Sir, enemy formation Charlie is moving toward New Haven," Amy reported. 20 ships breaking off from the main fight. Jake's jaw tightened. This was what he'd feared. The Zathrians were getting frustrated and wanted to hurt the humans where it mattered most. "All ships, intercept formation Charlie. We cannot let them reach the planet." Every functional human ship changed course, racing toward the enemy group threatening New Haven. It was exactly what the Zathrians wanted. By threatening the planet, they forced the scattered human ships to cluster together, where concentrated fire could destroy them. The Liberty, Defiant, Valiant, Ranger, and 3 surviving frigates formed up, probably for the first time since the battle began. Behind them, Beth Parker and 40,000 colonists watched the sky, knowing that if the human fleet failed, they would be next. "They're trying to draw us into a direct engagement," Dan said. "It's a trap." "I know," Jake replied, "but we don't have a choice. If they reach New Haven, this whole fight becomes pointless." The 2 forces met in the space between the planet and its largest moon. The Zathrians had numbers, but the humans had desperation. The battle that followed was brutal and close range, ships exchanging fire at distances measured in kilometers rather than thousands of kilometers. The Liberty took hits that penetrated her weakened shields and tore into her hull. Jake felt the ship dying around him, but held his position. "All weapons. Continuous fire. Don't let them through." Lisa's Defiant positioned itself directly in the path of the Zathrian formation, daring them to go through her. When they accepted the challenge, she made them pay for every meter, Her ship was on fire in 3 sections, but her weapons never stopped firing. The Valiant lost its main railgun when an enemy missile struck the weapon mount directly. Kate Sullivan, tears of frustration running down her face, switched to secondary weapons and kept fighting. For 30 minutes, the human fleet held the line. 30 minutes of continuous combat at ranges where every shot mattered. When the Zathrians finally broke off, they'd lost 15 ships, but they'd failed to reach New Haven. The human fleet drifted in space, battered almost beyond recognition. Every ship was damaged. Casualties were high. Ammunition was running low. But they'd held. On the Dreadclaw, Thex Zor stared at his casualty reports with something approaching shock. His fleet had lost over 100 ships. 100, against 12 human vessels that should have been obliterated in the opening minutes. "How many human ships have we destroyed?" he demanded. "2 confirmed, sir. Several others are heavily damaged." "2," Thex Zor repeated. "We've lost 100 ships, and only killed 2 of theirs." His tactical officer pulled up combat analysis. "Sir, the humans are fighting unlike anything in our database. They use unconventional tactics, they take risks that no sane species would accept, and they refuse to retreat even when tactically sound." Thex Zor's claws dug into his command chair. Pride warred with logic in his mind. He still had 200 ships. The humans were clearly on their last legs. One more major push would finish them. But the cost. "Prepare the fleet for a final assault," he ordered. "Tomorrow, we end this. Concentrate everything on their flagship. Kill their commander, and the rest will collapse." But as he gave the order, Thex Zor felt something he hadn't experienced in years of conquest. He felt uncertain. The humans had proven to be far more dangerous than anyone had predicted. What other surprises did they have waiting? On the Liberty, Jake received reports from across his battered fleet. Every captain, every crew member, was exhausted. But when he asked if anyone wanted to withdraw, the answer was the same from all of them. "Sir, we're still here," Lisa said simply. "We're staying," Jake nodded. He knew what tomorrow would bring. The Zathrians would throw everything at them in one final assault. The humans had to be ready. More importantly, they had to spring the trap that Jake had been preparing since before the battle began. Everything had led to this moment. Dawn broke on New Haven, though the colonists watching the sky couldn't see the battle happening in space above them. Beth Parker stood in the command center, surrounded by screens showing sensor data. The human fleet floated in space like wounded animals, barely holding together. "They're coming," Amy Price reported from the Liberty. "Full Zathrian fleet, 200 ships, heading directly for our position." Jake stood on his damaged bridge, surrounded by smoke and flickering lights. His crew looked exhausted, faces streaked with sweat and grime. Around them, the Liberty groaned and creaked, held together by Ryan Santos's miracles and sheer stubbornness. "All ships, report status," Jake ordered. The responses came in one by one. Every ship was damaged. The Defiant was running on backup power only. The Valiant had lost half its weapons. The frigates were barely spaceworthy. By every measure, the human fleet was finished. Dan Cooper looked at the tactical display showing 200 enemy ships bearing down on them. "Sir, this is it. They're going for a killing blow. Everything concentrated on the Liberty." "I know," Jake said calmly. "That's what we've been waiting for." Dan stared at him. "Sir? The entire battle," Jake explained. "Every move we've made, every retreat, every damaged ship limping away, all of it has been herding them into position. They think they're cornering us. Actually, we've been guiding them exactly where we need them to be." He pulled up a star map showing the Zathrian fleet's position. They were concentrated in a dense formation. All their ships clustered together for maximum firepower. They'd positioned themselves in a specific region of space, drawn there by days of careful maneuvering by the human fleet. "Dan, send the signal. Tell the Ranger it's time." Across the system, the destroyer Ranger suddenly came alive. For the past day, It had drifted in space, apparently crippled, engines cold, and weapons dark. The Zathrians had scanned it repeatedly and dismissed it as destroyed. They'd been wrong. The Ranger's reactor roared to full power. Captain Harris, who'd been waiting patiently with his crew for this exact moment, allowed himself a grim smile. Weapons, prepare to fire. Target the package. The package was a small metallic asteroid that Ryan Santos's engineering teams had been secretly modifying for 3 days. While the Zathrians were focused on the battle, human engineers had worked in shifts, packing the asteroid full of shaped charges and refined fuel. They'd turned it into the largest kinetic weapon ever deployed. "Sir, the Ranger's powering up," Thexzor's sensor officer reported. "But it's not targeting any of our ships. It's firing at an asteroid." Thexzor frowned. Why would they waste their last weapon on a rock? He got his answer 3 seconds later. The Ranger's experimental mass driver, a weapon that used the ship's entire reactor output for a single shot, fired. The magnetic pulse hit the modified asteroid and accelerated it to a significant fraction of light speed. The rock became a bullet, and the entire Zathrian fleet was standing directly in its path. "Evasive action!" Thexzor screamed, but it was too late. The asteroid hit the edge of the Zathrian formation, and the shaped charges detonated in sequence. The rock didn't just impact. It fragmented into thousands of pieces, each moving at devastating velocity. The explosion turned the asteroid into a shotgun blast of relativistic shrapnel that spread through the concentrated enemy fleet. 20 Zathrian ships simply vanished, torn apart before they could react. 30 more took catastrophic damage, their hulls shredded by debris. The formation shattered into chaos as ships tried desperately to avoid the expanding cloud of destruction. "Now," Jake commanded. "All ships, full assault. Everything we have left." The battered human fleet surged forward. Ships that looked dead suddenly moved. Weapons that appeared destroyed began firing. Every missile, every torpedo, every railgun round that the fleet had left launched simultaneously. The Defiant, running on backup power, dropped every remaining torpedo from its magazines. Lisa Chen's voice came through calm and steady. "For everyone we've lost. For everyone we're protecting. Fire." The Valiant's Kate Sullivan fired her last railgun rounds, using impossible angles and gravity assists. The projectiles came at the confused Zathrians from 6 different directions at once. The frigates, tiny and damaged, flew directly into the enemy formation like angry wasps, firing their few remaining weapons at point-blank range before darting away. And the Liberty, held together by hope and engineering miracles, fired everything. Jake's ship had been conserving ammunition, saving it for this moment. Now it unleashed a storm of destruction into the heart of the Zathrian fleet. The coordinated assault hit the already chaotic enemy formation from multiple vectors. Ships that had survived the asteroid strike found themselves under attack from every direction. The Zathrians tried to reform, to respond, but they'd been completely caught off guard. The Dreadclaw took 3 direct hits to its command section. On the bridge, Thexzor held onto his chair as the ship shuddered. Alarms screamed. Half his tactical displays went dark. Around him, his fleet was being torn apart. "Damage report," he demanded. "Catastrophic across the fleet, sir. We've lost 86 ships in the past 4 minutes. Critical damage to flagship. Weapons systems failing. Shields at 10%. End." Thexzor stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His fleet was dying. 200 ships against a handful of barely functional human vessels, and he was losing. How was this possible? Jake's voice came across all channels, broadcast so every Zathrian could hear. "Ambassador Thexzor, you came here to demonstrate your power, to show us the futility of resistance. Let me show you something instead." The Liberty, despite its damage, positioned itself directly in front of the Dreadclaw. A single battered carrier facing down a massive battleship. It should have been a joke. Instead, it looked like defiance made physical. "This is what happens when you threaten human civilians," Jake continued. This is what happens when you underestimate us. You calculated the odds. You ran the simulations. You forgot one variable. We're human, and we don't know how to quit. Retreat now, or I promise you, none of your ships will leave this system. It was a bluff. The Liberty was one good hit from critical failure. The entire human fleet had exhausted nearly all ammunition, but Thex Zor didn't know that. He saw only that the impossible had happened. The humans had destroyed or disabled more than half his fleet. Pride warred with survival instinct. Continue fighting and risk total annihilation, or retreat and live with the shame. Thex Zor looked at his dying fleet, at the human ships that refused to stay dead, and made his choice. All ships, retreat, he ordered quietly. Jump to hyperspace immediately. The remaining Zathrian ships, damaged and demoralized, fled. They abandoned their dead and vanished into hyperspace, leaving the New Haven system in silence. For a long moment, nobody on the Liberty moved. Then, Emma Walsh spoke quietly. Sir, they're gone. All enemy ships have left the system. Jake let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like days. Around him, his crew erupted in exhausted cheers. Across the fleet, the same celebration happened on every ship. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, they'd won. Damage control teams, start working on keeping us from falling apart, Jake ordered, though he was smiling. Medical teams to all injured personnel. And somebody find Ryan Santos and tell him he's getting a medal. In engineering, Ryan collapsed against a bulkhead, too exhausted to move. They'd held the ship together through sheer willpower. And now that the crisis was over, the adrenaline drained away. On New Haven, Beth Parker watched the sensor displays update. The enemy fleet was gone. The human ships, battered but victorious, began moving toward the planet. She activated the planetary comm system to Commander Morrison and all the crews of the human fleet. You came when no one else would. You stood against impossible odds. 40,000 people are alive today because of your courage. New Haven will never forget this debt. Jake received the message and smiled tiredly. Tell them, we're just glad we showed up. That's what humans do. 3 days later, Jake stood in the rebuilt council chamber at the Nexus station. The same species that had mocked his small fleet now watched him with very different expressions. The Galactic Council had demanded an explanation for how 12 ships had defeated 300. You want to know how we won? Jake asked. It's simple. You calculated based on ships and firepower. You forgot to factor in human innovation, our adaptability, our refusal to accept defeat. He activated a display showing the battle from beginning to end. We didn't fight your kind of battle. We used the terrain. We accepted risks you would never take. We adapted constantly. And when you thought you had us cornered, we revealed we'd been setting a trap the entire time. The Delphini representative spoke up. But the mathematics said, you should have lost. Mathematics describes what usually happens. Jake replied. It doesn't account for what happens when you push humans into a corner and threaten people we've sworn to protect. We don't care about the odds. We care about doing the right thing. Word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. The Zathrian Empire quietly abandoned its expansion plans in the Outer Rim. Other aggressive species reconsidered their strategies. Humanity had proven something important. Size wasn't everything. Innovation, determination, and courage could overcome numerical superiority. As Jake prepared to take his battered fleet home for repairs, he received an encrypted message. It came from the Krill, the insectoid species that had offered sympathy before the battle. Humanity has proven itself. The message read, the Krill Collective would speak with you about mutual defense treaties. You have shown that sometimes the smallest fleet is the most dangerous. Jake smiled and forwarded the message to Earth Command. The galaxy was finally learning. Never mock the small fleet. Not when it's human.